getting a call from prison now.
Oh, no. Gotta have that, yeah.
I know.
All right, we are about to go live. So,
You gotta take that, don't you? She's taking
No,
it.
That's
I just
okay.
missed it.
It's all good. And we are live on Facebook. Welcome, everybody. This is Lori Stone, and I'm the External Relations Director for the Northern California Innocence Project. And this is our second episode of our 3-series episode Summer Shelter Series, where we're talking all about policy work, and we're talking about policy reform work. And first of all, I want to say here in California, we are dealing with dozens and dozens of fires. And so I just want to say to everybody out there that we hope everybody is safe and staying safe. And we are thinking about everybody. One of our special guests is very close to one of the fires or multiple fires. So we'll hear from Darwin in just a bit. But I just want to say again that we are doing this series as part of communicating out to our network about our policy reform efforts. And we have esteemed guests for this episode today that I would like to shout out and have them introduce themselves. And we have Missy O'Connell, who is our staff attorney at NCIP and policy liaison. We have Nikki Hurst-Cook from the Loyola Project for the Innocent. And we have Jasmine Harris from California Innocence Project in San Diego. And then we have Darwin Crabtree, who is one of NCIP's clients, who was exonerated in January 2018. And he is joining us from Paradise, California. So I'm going to hand it off to each of you. Missy, I'm going to kick it off to you first. And if you can just give a little summary. Our last episode was all about past reform efforts. And this ties in very much to the whole group and what we're talking about today about current policy reform efforts. So if you can just summarize essentially where we're at, how we got here as far as our past reform efforts, that would be great. And just introduce yourself and then pass it on to Jasmine and then Nikki.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I share Lori's sentiment that we hope everyone is healthy and safe right now. And we appreciate you joining us. Where we left things just 2 weeks ago, we were talking about NCIP's history of being involved in policy work and how we've worked hard to expand our involvement up at the Capitol. And a huge piece of our visibility in Sacramento was when NCIP joined CIP and Loyola Project for the Innocent as a unified voice up at the Capitol. And we formed what we call the California Innocence Coalition. What we talked about briefly last time is there are at least 2 other innocence organizations that work with individuals in California, both Exonerated Nation and After Innocence, who really focus on helping our clients as they transition home. And so while they are innocence related, our 3 projects formed our coalition because we all have the same mission and goals, which is that we work to fight to get innocent people out of prison and then fight for reform to prevent wrongful convictions from happening and intervene when they do happen. And so the 3 of us here are who you would see up at the Capitol. The running joke is we're Missy, Jazzy, and Nikki, the trio. So it's easier for people to remember us. Our coalition has definitely become a strong voice of integrity behind innocence issues and focusing on testifying in support of bills, sponsoring legislation, and making sure our clients' voices are heard, which Darwin will talk about his involvement, which we have spent quite a few days up at the Capitol together lobbying for legislative efforts. And so that's basically how we all came together. And I'd like to introduce Jazzy, who she and I actually started at the same time of doing policy work in our offices. All three of us actually wear different hats in our organizations as well, but a big part of what we take massive pride in is having the privilege of being the faces of our organization up at the Capitol.
Jasmine.
Thank you for that introduction. That was very nice. I'm Jasmine Harris. I'm with the California Innocence Project down in San Diego. And like Missy said, it's really an honor to work as a coalition because there are issues that our clients face along the way that, you know, our clients might actually face a specific issue and we want to work on that legislatively, but we're not even aware that one of NCIP's clients is having a completely separate issue. And so kind of this collaboration is what has made our coalition an expert in innocence up at the Capitol. And that is really important for us to know that when legislators want to push something forward that have to do with innocence issues, that they come to us and they ask us if this is a good idea or which way should we go with it. And that's something that I'm really proud of about this coalition. And I think I'll get into the history and overview in a minute, but I'm going to pass it on to Nikki, who is our newest recruit. Once we met her, we knew she'd be perfect for it.
Yes.
And so she has joined us and she has the proper ending of her first name. So.
The most important part of
Yes.
this. Thanks, Jazzy. I'm Nikki. I am a staff attorney at Loyola Project for the Innocent. And as I said, I joined last fall and it was great. Jazzy and Missy took me in right away. So we're now a trio working together, and it has been really great to really be involved as a coalition together. We make all decisions together about what our positions are going to be going forward, and it's been a wonderfully collaborative experience. So I do other work as well at the project, but the policy work we really all do as one, which has been wonderful.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So I want to introduce Darwin and give him an opportunity to tell his story in summary for folks that don't know him and who haven't seen him in a long time. We haven't seen Darwin for a while. So tell us what you're up to also currently. But in this introduction, if you can tell just an overview of your story, how you got here. We'll talk more about your advocacy work and dive a little deeper into some of the things around your case and things like that later in the conversation. But if you can give a summary and just in this introduction, that would be helpful. Darwin.
Hi, folks. My name is Darwin Crabtree, and as Lori mentioned, I was exonerated in January of 2018. I was originally falsely accused and incarcerated for a sex offense that eventually required me to register as a sex offender for the rest of my life, and which led us to the work in the Capitol that we all got together on. One of those issues is that, for example, I spent 9 years in prison, and then I was released in 2001. And while we had the evidence to prove my innocence, we, and I say the Innocence Project, for almost 10 years were unable to have any success because there was no provision at law in California for a person who was innocent with new evidence to bring that evidence forth. Because if you were no longer incarcerated. A new law was passed in 2017, and I believe I was the second person to be exonerated due to that law. However, the law was so new that there were still archaic laws that were outdated regarding the compensation board. So while I was exonerated, I did not have standing for compensation because the new law wasn't recognized. So essentially, we went to the Capitol and lobbied for that change, which we'll talk about more. But now, like I said, I was exonerated in 2018, and I am working as a construction consultant in the Northern California area. I lost, my family and we lost our home and everything we had 2 years ago in the 2018 fire in Paradise. People might wonder, why are you still up there? you know, if that's where we're at now. But this was our home, and the home I'm in now was, which was my family's home. My folks passed away, both of them, just roughly 6 months ago, very close to each other. And I went ahead and took their home and decided to make it our home. And so that's what we're doing now. We're just getting on with our lives, and that's it.
And who, Darwin, who is we?
Well, I'm sorry. I always have that problem. My
Yes,
wife,
you do.
I'm sorry. My wife, Sandy, and I, we have a bunch of grandkids and kids, but Sandy and I, we're here in Paradise, and we have some of our kids and grandkids that live up here as well. Others that live in Oklahoma, others that live in Los Angeles, others that live in San Francisco, but they're always up here all the time to see us.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Darwin. Missy, can I ask you just briefly, just to set a little context before we move into, I want to hear a little bit more from Jasmine about the coalition and how the coalition works together. But can you talk about this specific law that Darwin mentioned that allowed us to become re-involved in the case and take that on, and that led to his exoneration in 2018. Can you talk about that and just set the context of, you know, the importance of policy reform work in our work moving forward in cases, or picking up in cases where things have stalled because a law doesn't support us moving forward?
Absolutely. And Darwin's case is just this amazing example of how the policy work is so intertwined with our litigation and our advocacy work. And so as Darwin mentioned, he could not challenge his wrongful conviction because he didn't have standing, because Darwin served his entire sentence for which he was convicted, and then of course had lifetime registration under the sex offender registry. But one of our brilliant attorneys, Paige Koenig, had remembered Darwin's case for years and probably haunted by his case by not being able to help him. And so when the change in law happened, she immediately filed the habeas that resulted in Darwin's exoneration. But what happened were two laws, actually, that were passed in that time. One of them was one that was sponsored by our projects. It was the passage of 1473b3, which basically changed the law in California for which newly discovered evidence could result in habeas relief. California has the highest standard for proving actual innocence in the country. We still have the highest standard for proving innocence in the country. But what our advocacy did and what our state legislature did was we actually amended newly discovered evidence to require that a showing that had a jury heard it, the jury more likely than not would have reached a different outcome. So bringing that standard more in line with a reasonable doubt standard. And so that was a massive change in habeas law that has really resulted in the freedom of several of our clients who were unable to meet this arguably unachievable standard of proving actual innocence. And that is one of the claims that Darwin was able to raise. But second to that was a piece of legislation that enacted 1473.7 in the penal code. And what's really crazy about this law is it's actually the impetus for immigration laws. It was to protect individuals who had criminal convictions, who were improperly advised or not advised of the immigration consequences, and giving them standing in order to challenge their conviction on those grounds. And the sponsors and author of that legislation said, wait a minute, we need to do something for innocent people who are no longer incarcerated so that they too can challenge their convictions, because right now they can't, and they will go on the rest of their lives having been wrongfully convicted for something that they didn't do. And that piece of legislation just was critical to allowing Darwin to get back into court and to finally be not just exonerated, but vindicated for the wrongs against him.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you for that. So I just want to run quickly. We're going to do for the remaining time that we have in this session. I want to talk about, we're going to hear about the coalition history, just a little bit more about how we work together as a coalition, the legislative process, just for anybody who is unfamiliar just with the basics of the legislative process and how that works. And then digging a little deeper into the engagement of exonerated people in advocacy work, the importance of their voices, the importance of those stories. So talking and hearing more from Darwin about his direct advocacy work up in Sacramento, doing lobbying and testifying. And I know there are other examples of others who have done that alongside you all as well. So we'd love to hear those stories. And then I want to spend the last part of this hour with everyone really talking about the current bills and what's happening. There's a lot of movement, there's a lot of change that's happening, and just digging deep into that and the importance of, again, bringing these voices into our advocacy work as we move into the next legislative session and what's in store for the coalition for this next session coming up. Again, anybody who's watching Facebook Live, I know that we were also planning to stream live with CIP on their Facebook page. I think there's some technical difficulties. So I think they've alerted everyone to view us on NCIP's Facebook page. But if anybody has any questions, comments, please put them in the comment section of this live feed now. And I'm monitoring that, and I will see if I can get that. If you want to do shout outs to anybody here on the panel, I am happy to do shout outs as well. And so let's move into Jasmine. If you want to talk about the coalition a bit more, that would be great.
Sure. I'm just wondering if we have like a going tally of who gets the most shout outs. No,
I do take notes, and I do. I'm a big tally taker, so yes, I'll do that.
Awesome. Well, and I don't want to repeat too much of what we've said already, but really just to, kind of reiterate for everybody that this is a relatively new idea that multiple innocence projects in a state would come together, and knowing that these are full offices, right? There's 15 people in my office. There's a lot of people in our offices, and we are the reps of those offices. And so there is a lot of discussion all year long. And just as an example, we just had our call last week about legislation that we want to put forward next year, right? And it takes that much planning. We're not even out of this session. And it takes that much planning and collaborating and compromising, certainly, and really just making sure that as a coalition, we're representing exonerated people and innocent people who are still fighting to get their way out. And also importantly, preventing wrongful convictions from happening at all. And a lot of times under those three areas, we partner with people who are doing that work as well, right? So we believe that we're experts in innocence and that we should have the voice up at the Capitol, but that is after collaborating with a bunch of different stakeholders, exonerated people, all of our office certainly. And so when we look at those things like preventing wrongful convictions, we are working with the California Public Defenders Association and the California Attorneys for Criminal Justice. And when we look at legislation that would support our clients once they're released, we are oftentimes supporting what Exonerated Nation is doing and After Innocence is doing, because they are the experts in that, right? And so we're really just trying to make sure that we're building a group of stakeholders that have the best interest of exonerated clients and people who are still fighting to get out in mind. And when we're choosing those stakeholders, we're also talking about the different legislators that we would be approaching to ask to carry our bills. And one of the things that we say at the Capitol all the time is that wrongful convictions and innocent people in prison is an apolitical issue, right? Doesn't matter what side of the aisle that you're on, it's an issue no matter what. And that has been very clear in the legislators that have taken different types of bills for us. We had Senator Anderson for many years, a very conservative Republican guy that really championed transitional services for our clients and really helped us take a stab at compensation. And then we have somebody like Senator Wiener that will take on a huge issue like eyewitness identification reform, and we all ended up being successful with that a couple years ago. And then you have the kind of center moderate Dems like Senator Glazer and Senator Monning who also want to be involved in this work. And so it's really just, like I said, it's an apolitical issue. The legislator is starting to realize that we're gaining a lot of allies up there and building a lot of relationships. And the legislators are people just like us, right? They're just regular citizens that want to support their constituents. And so if you get an exonerated person in front of them, or you're talking about, the issues that we're having with our clients or fighting for our clients, they are incredibly sympathetic. And what I've learned is that you just have to get in front of them. What I've also learned is that's very easy to do. You just get up to the Capitol, and Darwin will tell you about that as well. But that's kind of the process. It takes us a lot of time to decide on these bills. We work with other stakeholders and partnerships. We work with legislators across the aisle. And then once we get those decisions made and get the laws crafted, at least in the way to start, then we start the lobbying process, which is where people like Darwin have become incredibly helpful. So I'll pass that on to you.
Thank you. So Darwin, I'm gonna jump in with a question for you, because before going into sort of the legislative process and going in and lobbying, you're also doing the public education piece of the work that all of us do at all of these organizations, which is really important because we're trying to mobilize constituents in the whole state of California, which starts with telling your story and presenting out to groups. Can you talk about a little bit about your process over the last couple of years, going out and talking to these groups, and what that impact has on you and what that is for you?
Sure. As you know, I mean, since I've been exonerated since 2018, it's been a relatively new experience for me. And from going to the state capitol and lobbying to, for example, we also had which Lori was there, we had a meeting actually it's not a meeting, but I guess it was a seminar at the Mental Health Association, Forensic Mental Health Association. And we spoke, myself and another exoneree and Lori herself, as well as two other attorneys. We spoke, or was one other attorney, we spoke, spoke to, which was blew my mind, speaking to the professionals as far as prison officials, forensic psychologists, mental health workers that dealt in the legal field, the criminal law field, but not necessarily with innocence. Their deal was to work with the criminal justice system. So this was the first time that we were able to speak, and for an exoneree to open up and tell your story, it's in one way it can be very healing, on the other hand it can be very painful to have to tell your story over and over. It's like reliving it every time you do it. So, but it needs to be done because people don't know to the extent of the impact of what the experience of actually being wrongfully incarcerated, convicted does to a person. So, it's been a series of events that I've gone through between speaking at, like I said, the Mental Health Symposium, speaking at the Capitol, a number of senators. I think when we were down there, we probably had, between working with NCIP and working with Exonerated Nation, I've probably spoken to, a number of senators multiple times. I'd probably say 20 to 25 times. I've had meetings with people, and each time it really brings up a sense of I don't like to say it's re-traumatization, but in a way it is reliving it again. So I say that from the standpoint that it is a sacrifice. On one hand, it needs to be out there, but it takes a little bit out of you each time you do it.
And I remember at the mental health conference that you're referencing, when we were having dinner and Gloria, the other speaker, with you, just the conversation between the two of you about this trauma, and that it's always there. It's something that will always be with you, and it evolves. And so for you, this is, 2 years ago, 2 years ago almost, that we did the conference, actually, right? You were in a completely different place then, weren't you?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So, and I bring this up, and I wanted you to share the story because when we move into you going to the Capitol, it is, and Missy has said this before, about telling and retelling and just telling again. And you're constantly telling this story that is incredibly difficult. And you said something yesterday, and I want to jog your memory on this because you are an incredibly thoughtful and reflective person. And you said when we were talking on the phone that life is about potential. Can you do you remember this?
Hmm?
Can you talk about that and what you were getting at?
Yes, I'll tell you briefly that made me really think about this. I had my daughter and my granddaughters up over the last week, and we were able to watch a video of our family from 1987. And we saw everyone happy. I saw all my children were there. Everyone was happy. We were a family. And it made us both realize, as my daughter and I both, first we laughed, and then I turned and I saw that she was crying. And I found some tears in my eyes. And, my grandkids are saying, who's that? All these different people they didn't know. But it really hit us. It hit me strongly. I know she as well, is that being wrongfully convicted and taken away, we saw all the lost opportunity to have a future, to be a family, to know those years. And it's something that I was mentioning to you yesterday, and I realized that, that's what all of us as human beings, we live and we go through our stages of life. We have families, and we live for the potential to grow, to experience life. We have things that we love, like our family. Well, what we're living for is the potential to actually see that family blossom, that relationship blossom, to experience all those things that life has for you. But when you are taken away, when your freedom's taken away, you're taken away from everything and everyone. And not only you as the falsely incarcerated person have lost, but all of those people that are close to you, they lost their potential as well to have a relationship with you. So the loss, when someone is wrongfully convicted and incarcerated, the loss is so vast. It's not, I talk as an incarcerated person. We exonerees talk as ourselves. But each exoneree represents a multitude of loss. Every relationship that was close to him has experienced the loss as well, the loss of potential.
Thank you. So I want to move into sort of the logistics and do the legislative process 101, but I did want to start with you talking and just bringing that into the narrative, because that's why you are going to Sacramento. It's like you're sharing that story, you're sharing that trauma, and you are trying to get people to understand that loss, right?
Well, I'll tell you, yes, you are. And Lori, let me say one thing that I have experienced. I mentioned to you yesterday, I used the analogy of, I told you that I'm doing a lot better now, and I'm sure it'll be even better as you go. And I use the analogy of, it's one thing to show somebody a scar. That's years down the road after you've been exonerated, after you've got past it. It's another thing when you just had the wound and you're healing and someone sees a festering wound, a wound that is gaping. I said, that's where I was 2 years ago in the last year, speaking at these different meetings and what have you. So why I say that is that when we speak, we're going through the healing process at the same time. Mm-hmm. So every time you open up to share your story, you're opening up a real vulnerable spot. for people that you don't know to come in and look. You're basically opening up and saying, hey, come on, look at just how messed up my heart is. Look at what I'm going through. You know, there's nothing, no facades.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to give a shout out to Maurice Caldwell, who's watching, and he gave a similar shout out to you. He said, thank you for that, Darwin, as an exoneree that is so real. So we do always on these live events and everything that we do, we love to hear from our extended family of exonerees and family members in the community. And so we have a lot of people watching. We have students of ours, our new NCIP students at Santa Clara University have just started. So we have some new students that are watching. It's really important work. And so I want to move into that legislative process, give people just that basic understanding. And I'll leave it to Jasmine, Nikki, and Missy to sort of go all out together and, you know, give your little legislative process 101. And we'll start there and then move through. So whoever wants to take it away, fight for it. Rock, paper, scissors. It goes to Jasmine.
Jasmine?
Jasmine is muted. There you go.
Black on over here. I'll make it quick because I think, you know, Darwin and hearing about our exonerated clients is the most compelling part. But the nuts and bolts essentially are, you know, after we do all the things that we've said, we decide on what bills we're going to push forward. We've put stakeholders together and built coalitions with other agencies and organizations. We found an author for our bill. Essentially what happens is and something else we're really proud of is that we're actually crafting the language for these bills. We're taking a lot of input from experts and from other organizations as well. The code that we have been involved in, we have actually written all together collaboratively, which is very cool. So once all that happens and we submit it to the legislator and we're able to move forward with this bill, it's assigned to specific committees depending on what the bill is about. Oftentimes in most of our bills that we're working on, it goes to public safety. And if it has a price tag attached to it, it goes to appropriations. And essentially what you're doing is you are testifying in front of these committees. We, like I said, oftentimes like to have an exonerated person and then one of us will testify kind of the more technical side. And as you're moving through these committees, you're lobbying the members of these committees. And so a lot of the meetings that Darwin took with us is really to get the folks on these committees to believe in this work and believe in what we're doing. A lot of it really is education. It might not be specifically about the bill. Once it gets out of those committees, it has to go to a floor vote. And this is all on one side. So if it starts on the assembly side, you do that on the assembly side. If it gets past that, you then go into the Senate and do it all over again. If there are amendments taken along the way, you have to go back to your original House of Origin and have another floor vote. But it's a long process and it's a lot of lobbying and a lot of talking. But that's just the basic structure. Once it gets through all of that, it goes to the governor's desk. We always hope that he signs our bills and we've had some good luck with that, but we've also had bills that have been vetoed and we start all over again, or we have bills that have been gutted along the way out of a committee where they'll change and strike through quite a few things. Darwin knows a lot about that one. And that's really frustrating as well, but it just means that that was a small chip that we did that year and we're just gonna make it better next year. And that's generally how we work as well. But that's the process 101, quick rundown.
Awesome. Anything to add, Missy, Nikki? You good? All right, cool. Let's move on to that first part of it where you were talking about lobbying. And this is where Darwin has already mentioned a couple times about that process. So talk a bit more about what that looks like and what you do. What is that process and how are you engaging Darwin in that and others who are going to the Capitol and meeting with staffers and legislators? What does that look like? Missy, you want to take this?
Sure. Yeah, we'll just hit the first part of this because I know my colleagues are going to pick up the other pieces of this. So I will focus just solely on the lobbying piece, and that is where Darwin was just instrumental 2 years ago in legislation that sadly, as Jazzy just highlighted, some of our bills just get gutted by the end. And so you work so hard and you fight so hard. It's like going into the Super Bowl and getting the L at the end, you know? It's just hard, especially when you have people like Darwin who are sitting there retelling their stories over and over again, and it just doesn't move the needle to where we need it to be. And I want to put out there first, like, a true shout out to our legislature, because we have a pretty remarkable state legislature who really does care about innocence work, and so does our governor. We are really fortunate in California that not only that, like, it's not just that they care about these issues, but they're aware of these issues, and they're following these issues, and they really have, we believe, a personal vested interest in improving our criminal justice system, because they see faces like Darwin and Maurice, who has been an advocate for changes in law for many years as well, and countless others who have done this. But the lobbying piece is, once we've identified an author and we have a bill and it starts going through these committees, prior to testifying in a committee, we're going to every staffer who works for the legislators who are part of that committee. So if we start in the Public Safety Committee, we're going to those legislators' offices, we're meeting with these amazing staffers, and we're telling them about our bill. One, what the impetus for the bill is, and why our bill is the way to solve the problem that we've identified. And that involves us having technical conversations about, you know, our advocacy work, but then also telling the stories of our clients. And Darwin, gosh, there was one day that we truly had about 8 meetings in one day, and they're all about a half hour long. And Darwin, one after the other, new audience, had to retell his story. And you know, a lot of us can be so jaded by the end of that process, right? And not Darwin and not our other clients. They walk in and it's as if they're telling it for the first time again, because they realize that that's how they're going to affect change in our system. And what we always hope is that why our clients are so critical to the lobbying aspect is that when staffers hear our clients' stories, that they sit there and go, I don't want this happening to anyone that I love or anyone that I even know. And while we think we're pretty effective speakers, we cannot communicate the way that our clients can about their stories. And but I'm sure Darwin will share, there were some meetings that we had where no matter how tragic his story was, it was not received in the way that we expected our audience to receive it. And I think, and I'll let Darwin jump in here, but that was hard for us to see as advocates for our clients. And I think it was really devastating to see as the person whose story it is. And Darwin, I'm sure you remember that day.
Certainly. Can I speak up here?
Yeah, go.
I know exactly what you're talking about, and but this is, you know, this is something that I believe what it goes back to. It's an individual thing, and it is also, I mean, what I mean by it's the individual you're talking to. They may have their own personal feelings or views, but it's also you know, pressure from other constituents, let's say. But I know in the nature of my conviction as being a sex offense, that term is, I mean, let's just face it, in reality, in our society, it is a very nasty word and topic. Any sex offense of any type. And as an innocent person, you've been exonerated, you know, you have not committed that crime. However, the label has been put on you. And so when you bring these things, it's one thing to come up, that's what I saw. It's one thing to bring up, we're innocent. But when you when you start bringing up, because we were trying in that lobbying in that bill, we were trying to add to the compensation those that were innocent, like myself, that had to register as registered sex offenders, which I did in my life. I had to for 17 years after I was released, had to live underneath that. So I was an example of what we're trying to bring is that, look, if a person's going to be compensated because they had their freedom taken away, well, that same false accusation, that same false arrest, that same false imprisonment affected their ability to, as in my case, they had to live their life under a sex offender registration, and all that entails with the labeling and ostracization and what have you. Now, if you take people that you have staffers, you have the people that you're lobbying, they have their own feelings as well. And it seemed like when they heard all along, but when it came down to trying to get a recognition for those that were convicted of a sex offense, boom, the wall went up. In fact, am I not correct in saying that was what was gutted? A large part of that bill was compensation for those with a sex offense. So it just brings me back to the fact that we are still dealing with a social stigma on those that are innocent of certain crimes. And that, I think, is a lot of the issue. And how to break through that is a very difficult thing. I mean, the story has to keep being told. That's why it's so hard to tell it every time. Mm-hmm. Because everyone you speak to, either they're going to hear you. I mean, I dealt with that for years while I was in prison, before I went to prison, after I was released, and even after I was exonerated. There are still those that say, well, maybe. And I'm not want to say names, but one official who had a final say said, maybe I shouldn't say this, but said, hey, yeah, I'm all for it, except anything that has to do with sex offense, I want nothing to do with it. That's what you're up against.
And I just want to pull off of that, because the irony, I think, is when we were telling this story, right, as Darwin just laid out, we said to them, we're like, do you see how you're reacting to that categorization? Now imagine being wrongfully convicted, wrongfully categorized as that, right? And was trying to get them to see that their reaction is the very reason why someone like Darwin should be compensated for every year that he spent wrongfully on the sex offender registration. And we just couldn't convince them.
Missy, isn't it true though? Then we talked about this, and that's why I think it goes back to not just the individual, but the constituency. They may be all for, people who've been wrongfully convicted, wrongfully incarcerated, they should be compensated. But there again, there's the stigma of that topic that, maybe it is that it just seems like the stigma is too bad that they don't want to carry that, innocent or not, and have their constituents think wrongly of them.
Right. Well, I think it's an important part of the work is to break through those barriers, right? And it sometimes takes years to do so. And so the legislative process isn't just like a magic wand and you want something and you go in and they say yes and you fixed it and it's all better. Sometimes these things take years. Do you want to, Jasmine, Nikki, Missy, do you want to jump in about how long these things take? Just giving examples, just giving anything, what that looks like in the legislative process.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on what the issue is, right? So we had the eyewitness identification bill that got passed in 2018. And Missy, I always forget the stats on this. How long had that bill been tried and vetoed? It was
about 6 years. of losses on that piece of legislation, despite the fact that the best practices had been identified about 11 years before the law had passed.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, just to reiterate too, is, you know, like I said before, you have to know what you're going to be able to get, right? If you go in with, I want the world, and you don't know the lay of the land, and that's not going to work out, then you're just going to fizzle out and things are going to die pretty early on. What we've learned as a coalition is that if there's this kind of grander idea that we want to get to, we chip away at it every year. And so compensation has certainly been one of those things that we've been trying for multiple years. We're coming at it from all angles. We're trying to construct a way to get our clients compensated more than they are, because they're just not getting compensated. And so one year we tried to have a special master that would sit on the victims' compensation board. They didn't like that idea. We should compensate people automatically if the charges have been dropped against them or they were acquitted at a retrial. That wasn't enough. You know, they weren't innocent enough after all of that stuff happened. And the time that Darwin was with us and we lobbied so hard was to get that automatic compensation, but also to extend the statute of limitations. And that was really the only thing we got that year. But that's a win for us. That means Darwin gets to get compensated. That means whenever they drop the charges on my incredible Kimberly Long, that she gets to go for compensation, right? Like we still got something. We didn't get what we want, but we get to go back and try again.
Yeah. And
Right.
Nikki, from the newest member of the coalition's perspective, like what is your reaction to the process and how is it going for you? Can you talk a little bit about just some of the things that you notice about this process in lobbying and the time that it takes to move things forward and the struggle? The struggle is real. What does it look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting. This is my first, legislative session, so I'm really learning from Jasmine and Missy about how it all works and how different coalitions work together. I think sometimes people have it's interesting to see people have these great ideas and how they start, in one place and end up slightly somewhere else or end up smaller, and how they get changed over time depending on, what the politics are at the moment and who's involved with it and what coalitions have happened to sign on or not. And it's interesting to see how much is at play, and how many people and organizations that any bill has to pass through in order to get passed. It's actually incredible any bills get passed when you're really in it and see how many people are involved and how many opinions are in the mix.
Yeah. Thank you. So we have just a little time check. We have about 10 minutes, and I do want to get into the current bill status, and also just what to look ahead to, in the next session. And so let's move into the three of you talking about the status of the bills that the coalition is supporting currently. And then I will lead us into sort of finally where we're heading for the next session and where there's opportunities for those voices through testifying and all of that. We didn't touch on the actually testifying at committees and things like that. And I think that's an important piece that I don't want to ignore. And so there's always opportunities there. So let's start with the status of the current bills that we're supporting. So let's see, who should start on that? Let's hear from Missy. We haven't heard you in a second.
That's unheard of.
I mean, it's a panel of others, so just, fair opportunity.
I must have inadvertently hit my mute button. So this year has been really interesting, and the legislature is not isolated from all of the issues that are going on in our world right now, and we give them so much credit for still carrying on with the second part of this session and still having great momentum to get bills through. A lot of them are COVID related and fire related. I think something that wasn't mentioned, and I know this is a digression for a moment, but Darwin's not only at threat right now under the fire conditions, but Darwin lost everything in the Paradise fires a couple of years ago. And when we talk about constituents and how important that is, to be a constituent and talking to your legislators, I will never forget this moment. And Darwin, I'm sure you won't either, but we were at the end of a lobbying day, and Senator Nielsen is Darwin's senator, and we went into the room and we ran into one of our favorite staffers, and he very kindly said, "Hey, the boss is on his way to another meeting." And we just quickly got out that Darwin is not only an exoneree, but a survivor of the fires and in Senator Nielsen's district. And Senator Nielsen just stopped and brought Darwin and myself into his office, and he gave him as much time as Darwin wanted in that moment. And Darwin, being the wonderful human that he is, appreciated that the senator was on to another meeting, but Senator Nielsen just stopped, shook his hand, gave him his card, and let him know that he is there for them. And it was just this incredible moment to witness, and I can only imagine what it meant to you, Darwin.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, I didn't realize it was new to me, you know, but knowing what you guys are up against continually and how hard it is to get to a lot of these people, I couldn't realize more and more how big how big that was. I realize it more now than I did then because it was new for me.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible. And Senator Nielsen has sponsored legislation for exonerees. And it's just really remarkable. I didn't want that story to not make it out there because it was a pretty powerful experience. But because of COVID-related bills and fire bills, the focus up at the Capitol to criminal justice related, very needed, is around racial justice. And so the two bills that we were sponsoring earlier this year, they did die in the process because of the focus. And so that shifted our attention to not necessarily sponsoring bills, but making sure that we supported bills that are critical improvements to our criminal justice system and protecting our clients. And one of the biggest ones, actually, I'll mention two big ones and then I'll kick off to my colleagues, but two huge ones are AB 2542, which is the Racial Justice Act, and then AB 3070, which is the Anti-Discrimination in Jury Selection. And just very briefly, both of these bills could be just absolutely significant changes to our criminal justice system, and what we believe to be the first step of many to address what all of us who know about the criminal justice system is the racial disparity that just plagues our system. And we know that by doing innocence work, and now it's just recognized on such a grander scheme by all of the injustice that has happened this year in our country. Our legislature is doing what they feel they can at this moment to try to deal with racial injustice. And so those are two bills that just got out of the Assembly Appropriations Committee yesterday and will be going to the floor. And so if you care about defeating racial injustice in our country, that is a huge way to just make a difference. And so please reach out to your legislators and tell them to vote yes for those bills that will get to the Assembly floor next week and hopefully to the governor's desk.
Wonderful. I'm going to break in with just a community question, a question from our audience about follow-up from the laws that are passed. And Missy, you can reference the eyewitness ID law, because I think that is a good thing to reference since we're doing a big project on that. But her question is mainly about following up on these laws that are passed, right? Or bills passed into law. What do we do once they're passed? Is there any follow-up?
Yeah, so one is we definitely use those laws to help our clients, right? And so, for example, the two that we were talking about earlier with Darwin, like once those laws came into place, all three of our projects went back and looked at previous cases that we couldn't pursue because of the bad laws that had existed, and we relitigated those cases and advocated for our clients. And so we certainly have real time effectuation of changes in our law. But the eyewitness ID law that Jazzy was talking about, that was a huge piece of legislation in the state of California. It mandates that every law enforcement agency in the state, which is over 600 law enforcement agencies, that they adopt best practices when conducting eyewitness identification procedures. And with eyewitness misidentification being one of the leading causes of wrongful conviction, this, of course, was so significant in our efforts to reduce the risk of wrongful conviction. There was a delayed implementation of the law, so it just took effect January 2020. And then all of a sudden, we started getting calls from stakeholders saying, is there compliance? And we were like, great question. And so now, again, all three of our projects are working in collaboration with each other to do Public Records Act requests of every law enforcement agency in the state for their eyewitness identification procedures, to identify that they're in compliance with the best practices. And so far, we've had an amazing response from law enforcement in getting us those documents. And our hope is to release a report letting the public know what we found.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so Jasmine and Nikki, other updates on the current bills that we're supporting? Jump in.
I can jump in. One of the other bills that we supported was ACA 6, and it's to free the vote for Californians on parole. So in California, we have nearly 50,000 people who are currently on parole and unable to vote. And this would restore their voting rights. So it was introduced by Assemblymember McCarty, and it'll actually be on the ballot in November. So it's something to look out for, and it's a way for people to get involved. Some of our clients are released on parole, and it disproportionately affects Black and Brown people in our state. And this would be a great step in the direction of expanding access to vote, get rid of some voter suppression. It's one to look out for.
Awesome. Jasmine?
Yeah, there's a couple other ones I'll just say real quickly that are connected to our work. So one of them is Senate Bill 776 by Senator Skinner. And it's looking at the issue of police transparency and making sure that all of us as citizens know what law enforcement agencies are doing, how law enforcement agencies are behaving, law enforcement agents specifically. And she passed a bill, I think it was a couple years ago, that said, we should have access to information about incidents involving use of force. And she is expanding that to many different things, instances of prejudice or discrimination, claims of sexual inappropriateness or assault, things like that. So it's just broadening the amount of things that we could learn about law enforcement agencies in our communities, which we think is important, especially for the police misconduct that we have seen in our cases. It's good for us to know this stuff. So that's another one that we supported pretty heavily.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Okay, so in the final minute, what's ahead? And Jasmine, your tally, you got a shout out. Jill Benjamin says, shout out to Jasmine. Can you say what's in store for the coming up session, and what we're looking at, and how's Darwin going to be involved?
Oh, yeah.
Not just Darwin.
How about I say a couple, and then Nikki, you could say a couple, just because we have quite a list, honestly, going for next year that we're feeling pretty enthusiastic about. And I will say that we are going to certainly revisit the two bills that we tried to do this year that we had to kill essentially to make room for these other important things. But one of them is crafting an actual innocence standard. So in the state of California, in order for your conviction to be reversed, you have to fit in these very niche standards. And I'm not a lawyer, and so it took me a long time to kind of understand, like, well, don't you just prove that you're innocent and then they let you out, right? Like it's supposed to be that easy, and it's not, especially in California. And there actually isn't a standard articulated in statute that says if you're actually innocent and you prove, you know, under these certain burdens that you can be, your conviction can be reversed. So we're going to revisit that. And we're also going to revisit essentially, well, it's a two-part bill, but it has to do with false scientific evidence, which is speaks to forensic sciences and how they're used at trial and how they've been understood in the last few years and how we understand them now, which is really the most important part because science is changing all the time. And so somebody might have been convicted for an arson 30 years ago. Well, we understand arson very differently now, and we should be able to showcase that in our cases. So we'll be looking at that. Those are the two that we'll be revisiting. And I'll let my colleagues talk about the new guys.
All right, Nikki, you want to go?
Yeah, so we have a few others that we have discussed. One of them is addressing the issues of jailhouse informants. It's a practice that has been going on in California for a long time, and there have been some scandals and issues involving their use by law enforcement. So that's something that we are going to look into. And then we've also thought about other small changes that can be made through CDCR and getting some of our clients and future clients and people who are getting out on parole the ability to get out earlier once they've been found suitable, to get them signed up for Social Security so they're more set up upon their release, and other issues that affect our clients once they get out.
Awesome, thank you. Anything final, Missy? Is there anything else that we missed in looking ahead?
No, I would just say, because you asked the question about where Darwin would fit into all of this, Darwin, like all of our clients, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be an issue that intimately touched their case. They are the faces of wrongful conviction, and that is the bottom line. They are the faces to remind every stakeholder in our state that innocent people get convicted, and they are the faces that remind us that we constantly have to be improving our system so that there's not more of them. And so we just hope that Darwin and our other clients just continue with their selflessness and courage of continuing to put themselves out there to affect these changes, because we can't do it without them.
I was going to ask, I'm glad you brought that up to the end. What can we do? Like, I've gone and I went and lobbied with you, but not everyone, not all exonerees can be there and lobby with you, obviously. But what can we do, you know, other than, you know, contacting our senators, our congressmen, our assemblymen? How can we be most effective to really support what you're doing out there from our side? I mean, can we storm the gates?
Well, I think Darwin, you captured it beautifully when you were talking about the panel in front of the those forensic psychologists and everything. I mean, the idea, a big part of all of our missions as innocence projects, beyond exonerating our clients and reforming our system, but it is about education. And right now, people listening, you're all voters, right? You're all jurors. You might be future legislators. You might be future lawyers. Like, the more that Darwin, you and all of our other clients come on platforms like now, I like to see the glass half full and us all being in quarantine, is that we actually get to reach more people, because people are more accessible. People are home. People are on Zoom, on Facebook. We can talk to everyone and they can see your face. And so they don't just hear about an innocent person being incarcerated in Virginia. They think of Darwin Crabtree. They think of Maurice Caldwell, Zavion Johnson. A couple weeks ago, we talked to Lionel Rubalcaba, right? And that is how you guys will have this lasting impact on every person who has the ability to affect change in our state.
And we're doing, as a coalition, we are doing action days and sending out action alerts through social media, through NCIP's website, ncip.org. You can find toolkits that give you templated examples for social media posts. We'll update those as things move through the process, but we're always on social. So that's why we're doing these live events through social media, is because that's where people, that's the easiest place to find mass amount of people, especially as a coalition that has 3 organizations. So bringing everybody together. We will post the bills, links to the bills, so you can have direct access to read those. That was a request from the audience. So we'll post all those. We are posting on social media the numbers of the bills that go through and where they are in the process. So just, I would say for the general audience to stay educated and stay aware of what's going on and what's going through. This is obviously an election year, so our next and our final of the summer shelter series is going to be about voting and the importance of voting and what impact it has on wrongful convictions. And so we'll be discussing that next, but I want to thank everybody. We're out of time. I want to thank everybody so much for participating today. Thank you, Darwin from Paradise. Thank you, Jasmine from San Diego, Nikki from LA, and Missy from Danville in the Bay Area. Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Darwin, stay safe.
We will. You too.
Yep, everybody. Okay.
Yeah,
bye.
Bye.